Okay, I think we might get started. So I'd like to welcome council members, council staff and any members of the public who are online to this information session. We have some apologies: Peter Fairley-Jones, Christine Hahn, David Hughes and Jim Vallelonga. I'd like to acknowledge the land that we gather on tonight is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. This session has been convened for the purpose of briefing council members on our strategic asset management plans and long-term financial plan. This session is for information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. There is no set agenda and no minutes will be taken during this session. Following the presentation, the live stream will be paused. You're not? Oh, right. So we're not doing that? Not doing that, okay. All right. Thank you. Over to you.
All right, thank you everyone. It's my turn to sit at this end of the table tonight. As Nathan said, it's just a continuous circle of council tonight. Now, I'm going to keep this relatively informal and high level. We have been talking about asset management a lot over the last 12 to 18 months, so I don't want to go back over the basics too much, but I will do a bit of an intro. The reality is that by November this year we need to adopt updated asset management plans. We also have never had a strategic asset management plan, so my team are very busy trying to actually complete the revision of those, or revision and preparation of those key documents. We all know that council provides a wide range of services, and it's always wider than you think. There's always something new that I discover that we do. And we've got a huge amount of infrastructure that allow us to deliver those services. So from an infrastructure asset perspective, which is what I'm going to focus on, we break those into 4 main categories: transport, roads, footpaths, curbs, gutters, car parks, park houses, all of those types of things. Stormwater, so all of our drainage infrastructure, stormwater pipes, side entry pits, gross pollutant traps, basins, wetlands, all of those types of things. Open space, all of our parks, reserves, fences, sporting fields, lights, all of that type of thing. And then we have our buildings, which is obviously we're sitting in the most prestigious one right now. So excluding fleet and plant and other major electrical equipment, such as like the swimming centre pool filter, our internet and, our ICT, which is our information and technology infrastructure, and the physical land, we've got just on $500 million worth of infrastructure assets. So we've got a really important job to make sure that we manage those responsibly and that we maximise what they offer back to our community. And therefore, that strategic asset management is critical. There's a breakdown of those infrastructure assets, so the largest being our transport assets, followed, just under half as much by stormwater assets, building assets 53 million, and then the open space assets are 15 million. So again, I don't want to spend too long on what asset management is, but basically we've got $500,000 worth of assets. We need to know what they are, what condition they're in, how we're going to use them, how long the life we expect to get out of them is, how to maintain them so that we can achieve that life, how much they're going to cost to maintain, how often do we need to renew them, how much is that going to cost, at what point may we have to dispose of them, and we can also rationalise them as well at some point. And we need to know all of that to think about every single one of those assets, to use every cent that we have wisely right now, but also so that the future of our community is protected and has good assets, if not better assets for the future. So it is important because we only have finite resources right now, and we have a community that expects certain levels of service, and we need to make sure our community is safe and that our environment is amenable and it's accessible, and that our people can come and use a whole raft of services, and that we don't put that at risk by not managing our assets properly. I'm going to come back to Reed as an example of one of our conundrums, though, coming in a bit later on. Okay, so in council we've got an asset management policy. So that's, again, overarching. It's a high-level document that gives us basically the governance, the quality system, and I guess the strategic vision of our asset management. And then we soon are going to have our strategic asset management plan, and that can be a document that is 10 pages long and gives you the nuts and bolts of it in just a nice, simple to read document, or it can be a 110-page document which is full of engineering and endless tables and figures and graphs. Given that we've got detailed asset management plans, my preference and the way I'm approaching this is to go for the more streamlined approach. I don't think I'm going to get it down to 10 pages because there is a lot that needs to go in and we haven't had one before. But I want it to be a document that does set that high-level direction, and it shows how we prioritise the asset management, both for now with what we've got and all that aspirational stuff that we know we want to do, and we'll come back to talking about that in a bit. And pulls out the key parts of the asset management plan so that we collectively, but also the community, can pull that document up and go, okay, I get it, this is how we're going to do it. And be able to possibly answer those questions of, well, why have you spent money over there and why not here? Which is something that, again, we need to use our asset management to guide that decision making. Then we've got the 4 asset management plans. Now they set out the levels, or the standards of service, some better than others. And they set out the 10-year planning of actions and funding for each of the asset classes, both in terms of renewal and new and upgrade. And we'll go through all of that in a bit more detail. Oh, I love this diagram. Here's our asset management framework. Now, there are some other versions of this that I probably like more, but they've got even more boxes and more arrows, and it gets all a little bit overwhelming. So I thought I'd come back and stick to this one, which we've shown before. And really, in a nutshell, it's showing how interrelated everything we do is and how it all comes back to our asset management if we can do it really well. And if we do it really well, everything tends to balance out. Now, we're making improvements, but we're not quite, we've got a bit more of a journey to go to get there, but that's the ambition. Basically, you've got your asset management sitting in the centre, showing us what we've got, what we need to do, and guiding what type of investment needs to be. The community plan overarches that with what our community wants and needs. So again, our asset management has to deliver on what the community needs primarily, but wants ultimately is where you're trying to get to as well. And then that information drives into our long-term capital works program, which is a key input into the long-term financial plan, which is why me and Sharon are going to tag team in this presentation. And then from that you get an annual budget, which goes into delivery, and how you do delivery is also then linked back to your asset management plans. Now, sitting underneath this, and today I'm going to focus much more on renewal and upgrade and new asset management funding. Behind the scenes is also obviously the recurrent funding, and that's your everyday operations and maintenance work. So I'm not going to focus on that too much today. That's more to do with service level stuff, which is another conversation I want to have in the future. I guess sitting underneath all of this, though, is the governance, and it is really important. It's partly why everyone's here today. And the Audit and Risk Committee forms part of that, as does the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee, and I guess ultimately all of Council. So back to the asset management principles, and as I was alluding to before, it is a community-first driven process. and it is by understanding what the needs of the community are, but also understanding the aspirations so that we actually support what the community is and needs to be well on, under that sort of triple bottom line of social, cultural and economic and environmental, because I'd argue that environmental is part of the community as well. Access, inclusion and equity. Again, we have to have safe and accessible assets that allow us to cater for all of our community and acknowledge that, I guess, that accessibility and inclusion is an evolving space, and we actually need to do different things in that space to make sure that our community is welcoming for everybody. Environmental sustainability. We are living in a changing climate and we have changing environmental conditions and environmental quality things going on all around us all the time. So our asset management should be in there thinking about being resilient for the future and mitigating current environmental impacts as well. We want to be ahead of the game and be innovative and being leaders in this space. That's something for us to aspire to. So we'll all go on that journey together. The life cycle approach I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the future, or later in the presentation. It is about the entire life of the asset. Why do we need it in the first place? What exactly is it? What is the life expectancy of that asset? What do you need to maintain it? And what do you need to therefore do over whatever the life of it is to minimise the risk of it not getting to its full life and making sure that we don't spend money that we don't need to. Underpinning the entire thing in asset management is financial sustainability. So if we get our asset management right, that goes a huge way to getting us into a position of being financially sustainable, because we understand collectively what we need to spend our money on, when, how, why, and we understand how much we have got left to do the bigger, newer things that we also want to do without risking what we already have, and we must keep going. So I guess I want to talk about this as a journey of improvement. And many of you have been on the journey for a number of years, longer than me indeed, and some of you have only joined in the last couple of years. So I guess that's historically what we've had is an asset management policy, and that was last updated in 2022. We have transport, stormwater and open asset management plans, which were last revised in 2022 as well. A building asset management plan that has been a bit of a slow cab off the rank to be revised, but is well underway at the moment. So that's back from 2013. All of those documents are entirely valid and follow the principles of asset management. They're based, at least the transport, stormwater and open space ones, they're based on the IPWEA guidelines. They were a really good evolution in that asset management planning. The next iteration is going to be quite similar. It's just going to use better data where we have it, and I will explain that as we go along too. So all of those 4 asset management plans are currently being reviewed and revised, ready to give to Council in November this year. Under the Local Government Act, it is a requirement that we prepare infrastructure and asset management plans within 2 years of an election, but we want to make sure we prepare documents that are meaningful and actually provide what we need. So as I say, it's a very busy team finishing this all off at the moment. There's been a number of reviews, and there are sometimes it feels like it's a staggering amount of recommendations that Council's received regarding asset management, and I think that Bentley's asset management internal audit report from 2021 was like a bit of a milestone moment for Council, where it recommended, I'm not sure how many it is, it feels like a lot of actions whenever I go back and look at it. But it talked about improving the asset management plans and strategic asset management, getting improvement in the condition data, improving how we do our asset registers, our systems, our integrated asset management, how we embed our asset management policy in everything we do, and then how do we manage the asset data and how do we actually monitor and report our performance in it. Almost all of those actions have had a lot of progress against them, but I can't put my hand on my heart and say that we're anywhere near finished. There's still a lot of work to go there. And for me, when BRS did it was actually the Town Services Workforce Review last year, one of their key findings was that our asset management was still really letting us down. And their recommendations were more around the policy compliance. And again, that how do you embed the policy in our everyday action of council? Strong recommendation to get a strategic asset management plan, to go back in and look at how we get functional service levels set. Again, back into how we get asset data and manage that data. Key focus on how we're managing new and developer assets, and just overall how we were managing financial sustainability. So the asset data is just so important. And as I'm going through the review of these plans, I can only tell you how much more I realise how important it is. Because for the plans where we don't have updated information about condition, it becomes actually really, really hard to provide the recommendations of what the renewal program needs to be. So that importance of collecting data, so that asset condition information, and then using that to make a database decision to inform what is that life cycle costing, and therefore, again, maximise what we do with what we've got, and minimise, again, it's about minimising risk of letting assets go so long that instead of having to renew them, you're actually having to replace them. And that might be triple the cost of the renewal. So this is really important. Historically, we've had varied scopes for collecting asset condition data. I'm not saying that they're wrong, I'm saying that they're varied and probably didn't always hit the mark that we'd like to hit now. And just the methodology of collecting that data has been quite varied as well. And it's been really interesting talking to counterparts in other parts of the industry around what their methodologies for asset condition data collection is. I guess, trying to make sure that we take that on so that we can have the most efficient processes, because it's not actually cheap to get that data either. So you have to have the money to get the data to make the informed decision to be able to manage your money and save money in the long run. Now, strategic asset management is, I guess, as I said, critical. So we've got all these assets and we've got existing service levels. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to say, I know the elephant in the room is that the service levels may need to be reviewed because of what's going on. I don't want to focus on that tonight because it just muddies the water of where I want this conversation to go. So we've got all these assets and we've got service levels that we want to maintain, and we've got some other things that we really, really want to do. But then we've got a whole heap of things that can impact it's impacting right now, what our assets, what demands our assets are facing. I think demands is the right word. So we've got a population that's growing and expanding, and it's not just that there's more people, it's that the actual areas that we have people in is growing, and it's more dense, and it changes how we need to manage our assets, or what assets are going in the first place. I've lost a return there. We've also got changing population demographics. So, we've got more older people staying for longer, which is amazing. And then we've got a whole wonderful influx of younger families, and that will keep happening because we are a growth area. But you know what? Families with younger children grow up, and the younger children become youths and teens, and they've got different needs as well. So our assets have to be able to cope for all of that. And if there's one example of how that influences it, I can tell you it was that place strategy we've done recently, trying to understand and optimise how you deliver just that one service provision to that whole raft of just age and ability demographics it's really challenging. The community expectations are a demand on our assets. People want bigger, brighter, better things. But then we've got a growing asset base, which means we have more things that we need to pay for to manage. and we have more things that we also need to consider the depreciation of as well. So we get more things we have to think about from financial sustainability. Climate change is a demand that we need to have a think on, because if we don't think about it now when we're renewing things and building new things, at some point we're going to have an even bigger hit when all of a sudden it isn't functional for the environment that it is in. So that's about, again, that future protection. And we do need to think about environment impacts. Just the change in, say, the intensity of storm events recently has changed how we need to maintain our stormwater infrastructure. It's changed where some of our focus has had to go in terms of the increasing scale of erosion management and that type of thing. So there's just lots going on. The life cycle management, as I said, I was going to circle back to this. So this is all about how do we operate our assets efficiently, how do we make them last for as long as possible, and how do we consider that whole of life cost. So obviously we've got planned assets that we're going to invest in, but we also get gifted assets from developers or through grants. And then we've got new things that, you know, we decide to invest into. We have to operate and maintain it all. We have to renew it or replace it at an appropriate time, because you don't want to do it too soon because that's wasting your money, but you don't want it too late because that's wasting your money as well. You know, what's that, the sweet spot? That's what your asset management system tells you. When do you actually need to upgrade something or do something new, and how have you got the funding to do it? And when is the time to decommission something? So yeah, if you get this right, you prevent your assets from ageing, and you prevent because if you let your assets age, so if we stop renewing appropriately, and we are a little bit in this scenario right now, just being honest, our operations cost increases, and our maintenance and our renewal costs all increase as well, which all sits in our current budget, right? And we're running deficits in that. So again, we get this right, we mitigate or go some way to mitigating that risk. Okay, so I'm going to give you a lovely shiny strategic asset management plan, and it's going to cover all of that, and then it's going to have some wonderful tables in the background which basically gives the funding scenarios and financial scenarios. It will talk about financial sustainability and renewal ratios, but it's going to be at a level that people can pick up and understand. That's what I am aiming to do. For the asset management plans, as I say, we've got 4 that are going to come to you in September for the council meeting, and that's for approval to go out for them to be consulted on with the community. They're all at different levels. They all come effectively in the same template, but the level of confidence in them is different. So transport assets, this is the one we're most confident in, which is probably good. We've invested our money in it because it is the lion's share of where our assets sit. $322 million worth of road assets. I'm not going to read the table to you, you've got it in front of you, but we've got a decent amount. So FP is footpath and KG is curb and gutter. Sorry, I didn't expand that out. Oh, numbers. So we've got 26, it's a bit of an unusual unit measure, but 26 roundabouts and 27 car parks. Yes, numbers of them. Yeah, so sorry, it's an unusual unit. So we have, in 2023, we had all our transport assets go through their asset condition audit. It was the first time we've used a higher tech approach to condition data collection. I'll show you in the next slide what it looked like. But coming out of that, 66% of the assets good to very good, 34% fair to good, or fair to poor, sorry. It's not too bad, it's not awesome. We can keep doing better. And I know that those pictures are a bit nerdy and infrastructure-y, but do you know what? Doing road renewal is just, I don't know. I think it's fun. It's one of those things that you really quickly get to see a really good outcome, and you get to drive on it. So excuse my indulgence in those pictures. So in terms of understanding our transport assets, we've got a high confidence in what those assets are and what the condition of them is. So we did that condition assessment last year through the Infrastructure Management Group, and they have a high-tech, almost AI approach to doing the condition information collection. So there's one of their vans with all the high-speed cameras and laser levels and all the rest of it, and it all spits out into, if anyone ever is interested, I can show you the data tables that it comes out into. Again, that table's pretty fun as far as I'm concerned, and there's about 20 different ones that come out, and that's what we use to understand what we have to do. So the data gives us the defects, the conditions, and the measurements. We don't rely just solely on that technology. There is actual ground truthing done to make sure that the data collection itself is accurate, but two, there's proper reviews of the algorithms that are used to assess all of that data as well. This particular company, we contracted them also to give us an independent works program recommendation. So they did that predominantly for roads, and that's really useful for us to then back check against, I guess, our understanding of what we should do. And from all of that information, we've got basically the renewal requirements and the budget required for that over a 10-year horizon. So I feel the plan you're getting for that is good. This is where it gets a little bit possibly harder for everyone and maybe a little bit less palatable, because all of a sudden we are talking about much higher average annual renewal amounts. So for reference, I think the first year I worked here 3 or 4 years ago, I would suggest we had maybe $1.2 million, if that, in transport asset renewals. Last year we had 2.9 million. This year it's just on it might be 3.2 this year, but over the next 10 years we need to spend at least 3.8 million just in transport asset renewal in order to maintain that asset base and stop it from going too far into basically a category 4 or 5 condition. That's okay. The wonderful news is that Sharon and I work together. So Sharon knows what all these figures are, and we sit and we balance this out so that we have a good asset renewal ratio within what is actually still financially viable. So that's the renewal requirements. And then I'm going to do this for each asset class. Then we have the upgrade and new, or you might see some plans refer to new as acquisitions. So this is, this is a new, this might be, what do we need to upgrade or new? So there are really important things that we need to do that are upgrades or new for our community, and this is around accessibility. So getting more footpaths in where there are none, increasing the pram ramps, thinking about DDA, thinking about the safety considerations for all those different abilities that our town supports. We need to upgrade some road pavements. If anyone would like a prime example, go to Chamberlain Road. There's one that it is so far past renewal that we have no choice but to actually upgrade that entire road now. We want to avoid getting that to that point with other roads, but that's an example where we don't have a choice. Another example of road upgrade where we don't have to fund it because it's not our road, but it's 12th Street. So that's a DIT road, and basically it's gotten to the point that there's no other choice but to largely reconstruct that road now. So DIT, like us, but on a million times scale bigger, are also trying to work through this obviously all the time too. We do need to invest in new curb and gutter. We've got whole sections of our town that has no curb and gutter. Thinking about the streetscape scale of intervention, which I believe is the way that we can try and get the best bang for our buck. And then there's major new interventions, and like things like Walker Place Plaza redevelopment is an example where we went way beyond renewing Walker Place, and instead we converted it into what is an amazing shared use plaza. But we need to ask ourselves, you know, what is the reasonable amount of investment in new and upgrade? And I don't really have the answer for that just yet. Stormwater and drainage assets, more wonderful assets. Now they've got only a low replacement value of 1.22 million. And look, the condition based on, and it is based on, this is estimated basically on the useful life of what are long life assets. So stormwater assets are generally 70 to 100 year life. So we're estimating that 88% are in good to very good condition and 12% are fair. It's largely underground. I know when we do run CCTV through the pipes, not everything is as rosy as we think it is. And honestly, I'm genuine when I say, what do we know? What we find out day to day. We are very reactive in stormwater, and I think that's a big question around how do we become more proactive, and I don't have the answer for that. And I'm going to be honest, it's going to be a while until I can come back with some answers for that, because there's a big holistic piece of thinking around what do we want stormwater more strategically to do for us as a community. So for now, we've got the information that we've got. Is it fantastic and perfect? No. But I can see the way we need to go to get it better. And there's a fantastic picture of a culvert. So our average annual stormwater renewal is estimated at $112,000 annually. So basically we look at renewal over 10 years, and I'm just giving you the average. I'm basically averaging that out over 10 years and giving you what that is in equal increments, but it would be more up and down in the reality. Good news for this one is we've traditionally had around $100,000 to $107,000 in renewal, so we're probably okay. As I say, once we know where we're headed and what the condition is more detailed way, then we can come back into this space. So there is upgrade and new again needed in stormwater. The Gawler Surround Stormwater Management Plan provides a whole swathe of actions or guidance of actions and shows where we've got areas of concern that we need to address over time. There are some major interventions that we need to, at some point, get onto. Main North Road, Williston would be one of them. We know that people have issues along there. That's one of the hot spots that I have my maintenance crews out. We know we're getting 20 mil of rain. My guys are supposed to be out there the day before, making sure they're cleaning out the pipe culverts and all of that type of stuff, the driveway crossings. Otherwise, we're at risk of flooding people's houses out. Again, that's streetscape scale consideration. So if we're doing works on a road to do curb and gutter improvement, that's the good time to think about stormwater. How do we actually integrate our works package? Because if we do works together, we get better value for money. And as a community, I'd argue that if we are doing a streetscape intervention and they see the road getting renewed, the curb and gutter being repaired, improvements to stormwater and their footpath being renewed, repaired, whatever it needs to be, they actually get to see an outcome. So there's also a whole swathe of development-related stormwater infrastructure that we get. And that, again, needs a lot of thought in terms of its holistic integration with the rest of our assets. And I'll ask you the question again, what's reasonable for new and upgrade investment? Open space assets. So, I don't think that figure's right at 122. I think we've taken the stormwater one there. I thought it's actually supposed to be 15, so I'm sorry there's a mistake there. So what you see on the screen there in terms of what we own, that's what we know we own. We don't know what we don't know at this point, which is why we're currently out for tender for our asset condition audit for open space assets. Based on the data we had from 2017, 66% good to very good, 34% fair to poor. In all honesty, that's probably not too bad, but again, there's a journey to make that a better ratio. So as I say, that replacement value is 15 million. But I'm giving you all the heads up that when we come back with the asset condition assessment for open space assets, it is our expectation that the 2017 audit didn't capture them all and that there will be more. And we know that there's more anyway because we've grown, but that's captured in what that snapshot is there. But we think there's even more, and there are budget implications that come with that. So we're looking, I'm not sure if the tenders have come in for that asset condition. We have spoken a lot with, as I say, industry counterparts around how to do this, because all their feedback is that there's good ways to do it and there's not so good ways to do it, so we want to get the good way. And again, open space assets are something that the community hold in really high value. So the average annual open space renewal is $842,000, which is a little bit more than what we've historically had, which is more around the 350. That value is including how we're approaching, I guess, what we've proposed to approach through the playground strategy for playground renewal. But fences, bollards, irrigation systems, retaining walls, all the hardscaping, all the street furniture. There's sports and lights and all sorts of infrastructure already in there. We want to make sure we get that one right, as we do for all of them. In terms of upgraded new play spaces, the reality is that the renewal of many of our neighbourhood playgrounds may have an element of upgrade, but that actually allows them to meet the current service expectation. It's more the major play space upgrade, so Clonley and the big new one proposed either at Prince's Park and Carbethan way into the future. There would be big upgrades. Greening and biodiversity, I know that may seem odd to see, for people to see that in the open space asset, but the reality is the river corridors, the walking trails, and the potential for even more of that all fits into this open space realm. Again, streetscape scale considerations. If I'm renewing my road, my curb, my footpath, fixing up my stormwater, getting a streetscape of trees in that align with resilience and biodiversity is, a way that we can do it. So that coordination with other upgrades and value for money proposition. Major interventions for open space. We are talking about things like southern sporting precincts, the huge reserve and sports improvements that people want to see. That all comes and sits in here. And how, again, and what is reasonable for that new upgrade investment. Okay, I'm nearly done, and I'll hand over to Sharon, sorry. I was only going to do 10 slides and I've gone longer, sorry. Okay, so buildings, 48 buildings. Geographically, they're actually quite constrained to the town centre area generally, and then we've got a few outliers. Based on the condition assessment done in 2021, 65% good to very good and 35% fair. I could break that down into the subcategory of building assets, but I'm not going to tonight. Replacement value of 43 million, and we've got good confidence in that based on, it was 2022 condition assessment. We are a little bit behind, though, in our building maintenance and renewal works. So this has all been really thoroughly assessed over the last few months as part of the building asset management plan preparation. So an average annual of $375,000. All of those things that are listed there are what we're talking about. That's nearly, just under $100,000 more than we've been typically investing in building renewal, and probably, well, at least for the last couple of years, and prior to that we were investing less than half of that. So again, there is a backlog. New and upgrade. This is where the new public toilet buildings come in, because we are not replacing like for like. trying to do works at the Aquatic Centre, the lots of things we could do at the Sport and Community Centre. The depot revitalisation fits into this. If we want to have a regional dog pound, more change rooms for people. I'm going to say it again, how do you coordinate all of this with other upgrades? This is where we're trying to be smart at Dead Man's Pass. Yes, we're putting a new public toilet, but at the same time we've built it in with a fencing revitalisation program, a car park revitalisation program, and a small upgrade to the amenity, like in terms of lawn and irrigation at that park. By coordinating it, we can do it as a single project with a single project manager, and you do get value for money. Major interventions might be, a new gym at the Southern Sporting Area or whatever, but again, I ask you to think what's reasonable, new and upgrade investment. So back to this journey, we've done a lot of improvement, and I think everyone should be very proud of that. I do think the asset condition data is improving and driving a new, a really good review of what we have and how we need to use data to drive what the planning is. That's been pleasing to watch the team do that. This is going to sound really dry, but unit rate reviews are really important, because when I build something today at $12 a linear metre, and I've got that asset in place, but in 4 years' time, if it's actually $20 a linear metre, then the actual current value of it is that $20 a linear metre. So we've got lots of assets that are, of all different ages, but we have to consider what their current cost is. For those of you who are unaware, and I know no one here is, it's been a period of insane unit rate increase over the last 3 years in particular, and that has a massive impact to the bottom line for our finances, because the more expensive our assets are worth, the more we need to consider, the more we have to capture in depreciation. So the benchmarking and calibration of the unit rates we're using to industry and other local government rates is really important, because we don't want to get it too high, because again, that actually affects our bottom line, but we don't want to have it too low, because then we're putting the financial sustainability of asset renewal at risk too. So it's a real balanced approach, and can you see that this is actually this is a mathematical art, and you can probably do all sorts of things if you really wanted to dress it up to be something that you wanted it to be, but you need to not do that. You need to accept what it is and be willing to go, this is how that impacts my overall financial management. Implementing all those recommendations from the audits and the BRS findings, we're getting there. So that's some good improvements. Nothing comes without its challenges. So the cost of asset management systems and software is more than you might think, but we need to invest in that to be able to do scenario modelling ourselves, to be able to provide good real-time advice to all of you. Just the cost of doing the asset management business and resourcing it, and also the expectation management around it. Not just that people want more nicer things all the time, but also just between us and as staff back to our community, getting them to understand that I want this to be like 110% of a system, but I can't click my fingers and do that. I have to take the journey to get there. So what's next? So it is all about strategic asset scenario modelling, and we've got the Brightly software coming online to do that. And we need to then model different scenarios to inform the investment decisions. Do we do more in roads, or more in footpaths, or more in curbs, or do we do less in all of that and put more into open space? And we can maybe make a bit of a value judgment on how we do that, but at the end of the day, we need to see the economics of it and understand that if I shift $500,000 of transport asset renewal to open space, I've got the risk of my transport assets declining sooner than their expected asset life, having higher maintenance costs, so in all, we actually end up losing more money. let's decide how we're going to do our upgrade decisions. And again, what I want to get to is that dynamic analysis so that people can see what the options are over different timescales. So this is my handover slide to Sharon, because at the end of the day, how we invest in assets all comes down to the needs, which is what those asset management systems need to tell us and address. They are the needs. And then there's the wants. And then we've got our financial sustainability. So I've asked all the way through, what is that reasonable investment in new and upgraded assets? And again, it is about balancing financial sustainability with the best possible achievement of what the community needs and expects or wants. So the long-term financial plan for the next 10 years, it is maximised on outcomes for the priority infrastructure, so it is roads, stormwater reserves. The average annual renewal is 7.7 million. The average annual new and upgrade is 6 million. So we're talking about 13.7 million in for an annual delivery budget. Many of you have questioned me over time, is it possible? Can you actually deliver that quantum of work? We showed last year that we can, and I believe we've got the team that can do it now. I think we've built that team who can do it. In that 13.7 million is also fleet and plant and a few other things that aren't my pure infrastructure things, so keep that in mind. But then we need to consider over the next 10 years and in chunks of that next 10 years how we do prepare for the future larger investment. So it is about planning what they're going to be and how we're going to fund it. We need to be prepared for managing changing demands. Like, it's not a static environment for our community, our physical actual scenarios, like the environment that our assets are actually sitting in. And I guess I'm just going to leave it with you that the work you had a workshop while I was away. In the lead up to that, so we had collected all the different strategic projects that were coming from every single different plan we had and things that we'd heard around the table. So there were 38 strategic projects. And they had a value of around $240 million. And do you know what? When I sat down and tried to go, okay, what's a reasonable programming of this? What's a reasonable investment profile? It was really hard because I was like, but it would be really good to do this, and this, and that, and then you slice and dice. So that information that you helped us prioritise in that workshop is how we've actually prioritised what that new and upgrade work is focused on. And it's a quarter of what was there in the 38 projects that were there, right? So over 10 years, we're talking about being able to do a quarter of the $240 million of investment. The good news is that by being smart with that, we find ourselves in a financial position where we can start to do some of the bigger stuff. None of that is fancy, big, shiny stuff. It is really still roads and basins and footpaths, a couple of change rooms, like modular change rooms. It's really nothing very exciting, but it is the fundamentals that keep the town running. So, we've got a journey to bring everyone on to understand that we have to prioritise what we invest in to get the best value outcome without that compromising the long-term position. Sharon, I'll hand over to you. And I guess I should ask if there's any questions, but do we want? Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Mayor Karen. Why aren't we? Well, we are. So let me go back to my handy cheat sheet. So our average. So what we're recommending. We do, and I agree, and I guess that's why I keep coming back to that streetscape scale suite of interventions, because it's not just having a footpath, it's also having shade over it and making sure that you can get your stroller or your kid's plastic trike or whatever, or someone who's got a mobility aid, they can actually use it too. So we're talking around $460,000 a year in footpath renewal. In the new and upgrade, there's another, what have we got? Another 400 or 500 a year in new footpath delivery, because it is really important, and we've still got multiple parts of our community that actually can't get to a key location because they haven't got a footpath. So yeah, no, you're right. Do I need to press something to make that happen? Okay, right, okay.
From the bypass
Yeah.
of the main North Road, Williston, there's no footpath till you get to the corner. There's no footpath.
That's right.
And there's a goat track. There's a goat track.
Yeah, I know, and the backlog of new footpaths, I think, is, we've got a new footpath policy which sets out, how do we prioritise where we're going to put the new footpaths. I mean, I'd argue that that's probably ready for a review as well, because we have done some good progress on delivering those footpaths. But there's just so much more to go.
You said that Main North Road, Williston will happen in the next council term. That's what you said.
No, I didn't say that. I said that's one of those new and upgrade projects that we need to consider. And we need to consider where it sits in the priority of investment. Along with DIT as well. So in Main North Road, Williston space, just as I guess an aside, less about asset management, I think it will be October. If we're lucky, it might be September, but at least by October, we actually are going to present a report to council on what the scope of works for Main North Road, Williston would look like. It is a gigantic project. But we have done some concept designing work, and we've got that out being independently cost estimated at the moment to re-inform everything. And again, looking at where that sits in the priority of new and upgrade. Paul, Councillor Kosh?
You talked about playgrounds and community expectations and demands. How do we make sure that we rationalise that we don't have everything at every playground, and we, that there's different hierarchy, because you can't have everything everywhere.
Oh, I 100% agree, and I think that is set out really strongly in the place-based strategy. It does set out those three main categories for play spaces, and it outlines exactly what goes into each category and why each is located where it is. And it even has the justification for the rationalisation of some of them. I can take that further into smaller assets. It's the barbecues that we have and the shelters that we have and the bins that we have. Do we really need to have all of them we've got? And they may seem like small things, but they actually take energy and effort to maintain and renew. So that's part of the work I'm doing behind the scenes. I will wait for the open space asset condition data to come in, because I can use that to actually rationalise, from a data-driven perspective on that as well. Yes, we need to be smart with what we have, where and why we have it.
I did notice at Hammerford Grove you've taken away one of the bins, which is fantastic, because there was like 3 bins, I think, in 10 metres or something. It was just crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, I think sometimes I'm using a global we as designers, we get very enthusiastic around trying to provide everything at each location. And again, it's sometimes it's actually just not required, and it is a cost that globally we can't bear. I'll give you a spot example of that right now. That is the Reed Play space that we've invested. Well, we've been really fortunate because the state government has given us the grant for it. Of course, we now have to put that into our maintenance costing and renewal costing. But it's wonderful that we've been able to put that play space there. People are asking for a bin down at the play space. And I don't mean to sound awkward, but we're not putting a bin down at the play space. We're going to put one back up at the top of the path where it is easier to do a bin run, and people can take some responsibility for taking their rubbish a bit with them. Yes, these are the types of things. And again, they may sound like almost trivial, but it's the cumulative impact of all of that does have a huge impact, probably more on maintenance cost, if I'm honest. And we need to manage it, because that's recurrent budget and that's what we're running in deficit. Oh, I don't know who to go for. Councillor White.
Thanks.
I've had to do this before.
Thanks, Wendy. Your presentation was fantastic, and breaking it down the way you've done makes a lot of sense. I guess I was just wondering, so that overall arching, so underneath the asset management policy, but above the 4 asset management plans, that strategic plan that you're discussing that's coming, can you just clarify or expand a little bit more about what's the purpose of that, and that sits on top of the 4 main plans?
Okay, you know what? The most important part of that is it presents the information about the 4 asset classes in one setting, so that you can see holistically what the overall asset costs are. And again, so that you can see that, well, we might be spending $3.8 million in roads and $800,000 in open space. You can see what and why is going to each of those. It helps make a more coordinated. It's a more coordinated decision. It's just more coordinated information. And again, that will set out the higher level objectives that those individual plans fall under. Again, so that it's just so easy to pick up one of those asset management plans in isolation and go, oh, well, you know what, it doesn't really matter if we cut a bit of this out. Or no, it's actually the other way around. Oh, it doesn't really matter if we put a bit more money into this one, because because you don't understand that if you cut money to get more money into something, you're cutting it out of another thing, and if you aren't aware of what that other thing is and the impact of that, you're making flawed decisions. And I think it's so important. So I feel like I'm waffling. Sharon, please go.
Also, I think from a strategic asset management plan, it's a document that simplifies the technical detail that actually the community can relate to. So it's sort of that in between to sit there and say, okay, it's not the policy, which is probably a bit, airy-fairy, but it adds that substance that a person that's outside of that asset management area could actually relate to and understand the direction and what we're actually doing without going into the 100-page document that you have to actually flick through, which tends to have more technical data because it's probably more, the asset management plans itself is probably more an internal document, where that strategic asset management plan is that more external document that we actually use to communicate to the community as to where we're going with our asset management.
Yeah,
is that better?
Yeah, I think so. And
Councillor
so
White?
will it also include, I guess, the priorities, and you know how you're talking before about, like the Dead Man's Pass toilet upgrade is not just the toilets, there's lots of other things going on. So is that sort of talking at one, the priorities, and two, how the different asset types would relate in a project, or is it's not that in depth, it's more just...
It does to a certain extent. It doesn't go into the breakdown of the individual components of those projects, but again, it's setting the scene for that direction in decision making, to be thinking about coordinating investment in assets so that you get that value for money project delivery. So there's sort of, more some of the principles that come through in it. But it does look at, the primary areas of investment for each of the asset classes in that. And again, it's like 2 pages and you see it all at once. Whereas, honestly, the asset management plans, you are looking through pages of documents and some very dry engineering tables and graphs. I love graphs, but it is pretty dry to try and get to what that is. So, yeah, it's probably that more useful community interface document.
And I think that the integration of the projects and all that sort of stuff in that relationship will actually come through when the projects come up as for consideration as part of the annual business plan. And that's what we actually really try to do with some of the, so even Dead Man's Pass, Clark Road, 12th Street, and all that sort of stuff. We sort of try to package those up into a project, because previously we probably would have said that we're doing this bit of footpath, this bit of drainage and all that sort of stuff. Would have still done it in the same location, but it wasn't actually clear that we're actually packaging it up and we're actually making a significant investment. And it is that visual, I suppose, that community can see, oh, okay, you spent $1 million, I can actually see the $1 million. Whereas in the past, where you sort of from, I suppose, some part of that asset management of saying, oh, okay, well, I'll do a section of road here, I'll do a section of curb here and all that sort of stuff. So it's a bit piecemeal. So it's more that holistic and doing it as a project-based rather than your stock standard renewal program, you know, and it is that integration of renewal component. So like some of these projects, even like Clark Road and 12th Street, we would have said it's an upgrade project, but essentially what we've actually done is use some of the funding from our renewal project anyway, and we've just consolidated it into one project from that perspective as well. So.
Thank you, Wendy. We quite often hear where somebody will say something about a road and they'll say, no, that's a state government road. And, you know, Murray Street used to always be Gawler's. So somewhere down the line, Gawler Council doesn't own Murray Street anymore. It's a state government road. And you hear this all the time. But whenever there's a problem with those roads and there's a pothole or the drainage, guess who fixes them? Your staff. How is that compensated?
So we typically, where the road asset isn't ours, we do negotiate with the state government agency that's responsible for it. So 12th Street is the classic example of that at the moment. I mean, I'm not sure who, I think we've probably gotten more complaints about 12th Street than DIT ever has. But, you know, through our negotiating with DIT, we've said, DIT, you need to prioritise reconstructing 12th Street. So, and where there's potholes on 12th Street, DIT's crews do actually come out and we liaise back in with them. Likewise for Lyndock Road and multiple other ones. Look, I think it's actually really important that I'm sorry DIT to sound a bit parochial or whatever it is, but I actually think we shouldn't be using our resources on another asset owner's asset. We have enough of our own to be maintaining. So we use the right systems and processes to liaise back in with DIT. We have some good contacts there. And their response crews are actually very responsive when you consider the scale of network that they are managing. But yeah, it can be really frustrating, Councillor Samuel, because we are the ones who cop the complaints. Oh, sorry, Councillor Solomon.
Thank you. Sorry, and I'm not sure if it's something that Sharon might talk about later, but I'm just wondering. Obviously, you mentioned Reed, the Reed playground there, which is great. The state government gave us that kind of money. With things like that, say the state or federal government want to give us a large sum of money for, what's popular at the moment, a football, precinct. How do we sort of manage those ambitions of the state and federal government and align it with our asset management and our long-term financial plan?
That is such a fantastic question, and I'll expand it because it's not just assets that we may get through grants from state government or federal government. It's also all the assets that come through from development. So they're all gifted assets. Now we have a level of control in those. So for most of those types of projects or development, council engineers are either involved in the project delivery or they are involved in the design sign-off and the inspection. So the sign-off council's involved in to make sure that we're not getting assets that don't meet our requirements, right? So we're involved, that's one way we protect ourselves. The impact of those on our bottom line in terms of ultimately increased depreciation, increased maintenance, having to add in extra renewal cost. At the end of the day, we just have to add it in and understand what it is. That's the key, understanding what the actual impact is. And I guess there is potentially, hypothetically, there's a scenario where you could turn around and say, actually, no, we don't want to do this project because it's going to have such an impact on our recurrent budget for the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 or whatever the timescale is, that we actually are going to say no, gracefully say no. That would be a really interesting and very political scenario, and, that would be one that obviously all the people around the table here would be making, and you just have to make it based on the most informed information that can be provided. This is understanding operations and maintenance costs, and just the whole and the life cycle cost of that renewal and even decommissioning cost in advance of doing new projects is really critical, and it's something that often isn't considered very well. So that's something that we are getting definitely better at. But then it is about communicating that to the finance side and saying, have we actually got capacity to do this, or what do we have to change to do this? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So in relation to, I suppose, that question about funding and having that opportunity, I suppose, taking advantage of opportunities that may present themselves through election cycles and all that sort of stuff. And I think that that's where some of that understanding of the prioritisation of those projects as well, that's where it's actually quite important. Because then if we actually understand the priorities from us as a collective, as a council, when those funding opportunities come forward, we actually have a stream of projects that we can actually sort of sit there and say, we've got an opportunity here to get some money to fund this, and it's maybe 2 years down the track. We can actually then just shuffle that around. Like at the moment, there probably isn't an agreed, and I suspect I sent that information out, and I suspect that there's still probably people that don't agree with how people voted and all that sort of stuff, but that's the collective view of the group. And so now it's the challenge of saying, okay, over the next period of time, so given our financial position, there's a lot of those major things that we don't have the capacity to do in the next the next 10-year planning time frame. But it's also understanding what we want to do outside. So while we're doing 10-year asset management plans and 10-year long-term financial plans, we're actually thinking about 20 years to sit there and say, okay, well, what do we actually need to do over the next 20 years? Because we actually have to work out the capacity so we can actually do those major projects. So we can actually sit there and so in year 15, we've got the capacity, but if in year 12, someone says, okay, well, I'm going to give you $15 million to redevelop the aquatic centre, we've still got that financial capacity to sit there and say, so we can actually take advantage of that opportunity as well. So I think it's through this asset management planning, like how we're actually doing it, and the long-term financial plan, and understanding what we actually want to do from a financial perspective and what we actually want to do from a community perspective as well. And then ideally, what I would like to see as well is to sit there and say, so we have the long-term financial plan and we have our annual business plan, but maybe we also have what I would decide as a corporate plan that basically chunks that down into a shorter planning horizon. So again, we're in a better position to sit there and say, okay, when we come to budget, we know what the major project's going to come up. We know what we essentially should know what we're actually going to be spending our money on over that shorter period of time of that 4 year, rather than sitting there thinking, okay, well, what's in the lolly jar this year that we're actually going to pick out, So we there might be a few little minor things that we sort of have think, we can do this or we can do that, but like the bulk of the spend or the bulk of the projects that we're actually going to deliver on, we actually understand what we're going to do, and the community understands. So that budget process and that budget cycle and that 4 year planning cycle should actually not be much of a surprise to the community as well. And obviously if we get the asset management plans right, and so we'll have the renewal component, we'll have what we would sit there and say basic new, but then let's actually talk about what the strategic asset spend that we're actually going to do, and what sort of assets that there are going to be as well. So that's one of the ways that we can actually manage it, and that's realistically how we're probably going to try and structure the long-term financial plan. We're not going to get 100% right this first time round, but I think it is just that journey of trying to make sure that we actually improve it as we actually get a greater understanding of where we're at and where the community is as well, because we're basing it on information that we know today. 12 months down the track, the whole landscape may be completely different.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm liking is sort of, I mean, to simplify, and Councillor White's question was a good one, but if you look at your plans, you itemising with your data the why, then you're working through the how, and then you have to weigh up the aspirational pros and cons of those how decisions. Members would have heard me speak before about the Brosses big project and the like. Some of the things that might not be the sexy parts, but I actually find quite informative, is how they've earmarked certain projects, but they've actually been able to work in some of their renewal items and streetscapes and footpath renewal and the like. And that's actually then helped dictate, so something that they go, oh, we're going to do that next year because we're financially ready to do it. If we do it in 3 years' time, it actually pairs together with this and that's the bigger map that they've done throughout, and then the linkages throughout. Not to say that they've got all that right, mind you, they've quite openly admit that, you know, if they were to do it again, there's areas that they'd improve, but they were very strong in this means that, and we have another pot of money there, and we can tick this off there, if we think of it as how that actually links in, not just that reactive spending model. Which you know, it is good to hear that that's the line of thought in the space.
Yeah, thank you. I think that how do you coordinate delivery for that best value proposition? And I think, you know, is up on there, like preparing for the future larger investments, so the planning of it and planning the funding of it, like the funding structure of it, is really important that we're doing that in parallel. So we're not losing the line of sight of other things that we know that we would really like to have, but we're getting the strategy and the planning for it right, and the right funding strategy is part of that. And that managing the changing demands is, maybe I should have expanded that, it's managing changing demands, but also managing changing capacity. So, like Sharon said, if we need to be ready so that if the capacity to a grant or whatever comes in to progress one of our key, you know, major future projects, that we are in the position that we can jump on that appropriately. So there's that has to happen in parallel with the rest of the, dare I say it, very sensible, you know, asset investment that we need to focus on primarily for the next 10 years.
Can I just go back to what Councillor Solomon said? I mean, it seems to me in the last few election cycles, we're getting more of this special fund money being promised to the communities as part of the cycle. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll just park that. So part of it is as well, when we have a good asset management plan, the other side of that is communicating it with state government, so that when they're looking around for sweeteners to promise our community, it aligns with what we've already said should be next. And if we have that good communication, then we won't get stuck with some things. When I came into council, we had some projects that seemed to have jumped the gun somehow from what looked like our priorities. So without any, you know, judgment on that, I think it's really important that we keep that circle of communication going, so that there's no more surprises. And heaven help us, we should ever have to be in a position to say no to state government money.
Yeah, I agree.
But, you know, the same thing, there shouldn't be a facility for one part of the community to be able to lobby and then jump the gun on that situation. And finally, to get back, yes, Sharon, I think setting the priorities for the projects was a great exercise. I'm going to give it a bit more rigour. You know, I think it was, yeah, interesting.
More questions? In relation to, but I think that process of prioritising, I think the issue for this council is there were so many. There was just so many. As 38, to try and prioritise 38 projects, given that we know that they're all important to the community. It's just that question on that order and all that sort of stuff. And obviously everyone's going to have their own little bit of a preference for a particular type of projects. Out of that process, I think that one of the things that I found reassuring was that as a collective group, you're probably pretty much on the same page as us as the executive team, and understanding that realistically our short-term focus needs to be actually on that renewals component and on the basic infrastructure. So a lot of the things that actually rated high were the asset backlog, which covers, you know, the roads, the footpaths, the open space, the buildings. There was a lot of thing about active transport, so it was about, you know, making sure that we've actually got the spend on our footpaths and all that sort of stuff. And we might just do, and the approach that we've sort of taken is to sit there and say, yes, we can just spend a lot of money and just do basic footpaths. But again, the same scenario, how can we actually integrate all the objectives of what we actually want to do, in the sense of saying, okay, well, we're going to do some footpaths and we want to green Gawler and we want to do biodiversity and we want to do this. How can we actually incorporate that into one project? So when Wendy talks about the streetscapes, that's what we're actually talking about. So it's a combination of using a bit of, you know, so we sort of sit there and say, oh, it's a streetscape. So we've said, we've got our basic level of renewal for our footpaths and our new, and then we've over on top of that, we're also going to do a whole heap of streetscapes. And those streetscape stuff is actually focusing on those active transports, those pedestrian linkages, those main entrance areas to the city, to the town, and all that as well. So it's not that we're just going to do a random streetscape down some, you know, some residential street. It's going to be those main focal points of those connection points to, I suppose, as Cody said in the some of the growth stuff. You know, how do we actually get those connection points from one end of the town to the other through an active transport, whether it's the road transport or like from a bike walk and all that sort of stuff as well. So it is a bit of a change in thinking, you know. So and we might actually present projects that are quite daunting in value, because they might be $1 million project, but they're actually, you know, so they're not the shiny thing of you know, a new Southern Sporting Precinct, but they are new and then they will be impressive. You know, it's not just doing the basics and all that sort of stuff as well. So
I totally agree, and I think it was a really, really useful exercise, and we do have to prioritise and we can't do everything. Absolutely agree. And I do agree with bundling, and I do agree with focusing on the non-shiny stuff. I'm a details person. When I looked at that thing, I realised that not all elected members participated that night, and I think it was more than just the executive team. I can be pretty sure that the 7 votes for more staff were not elected members.
there was nothing in there for more staff. Effectively, the project that you're referring to is that we actually need to do a workforce planning. So that wasn't asking for more staff. So that was more about the fact that from an operational perspective, we need to do some work to manage our recurrent budget. We need to actually do some workforce planning. So when we actually are requiring staff and understanding what that required staff, which links back to our assets and our our gifted assets, our new assets, and all that sort of stuff as well, and the priorities of that. So, so from that
Thank
perspective.
you. No, I'm delighted to hear that. That's exactly what we need to do. Thank you.
So I have a lot of slides, but I'm not going to go through them all. So what this presentation is actually loaded up on the hub as well. So a lot of the stuff that I'm actually going to go through is more just... Turn it off. No, I turned it off. Just more about what the actual long-term financial plan is going to look like. Yes, I'll have some numbers at the end, But it's more about the principles and then the strategies. And I think it, again, is the same sort of sitting there saying, okay, let's set the principles of what we're actually going to try and adhere to, and making sure that you're comfortable with the principles that we've actually applied, and what we think, I suppose, because this is a presentation of what we think that the key financial strategies, which links a lot back to the asset management. Realistically, from a, we are a services organisation, but we're predominantly an asset management organisation as well. So we actually do have that connection. So the other night when we had the interactive session, the financial goals were set there to sit there and say, to actually get some feedback from council members. Generally, most people sort of, I said, I do take silence as acceptance. So if you didn't provide feedback, I take that's you accept what's actually there. But some of the feedback was that pretty much it's hitting the mark. And there was some questions in relation to what it actually means. So I provided that. I think the only one that, obviously with the responsible budget, asset management and debt management, a lot of the targets are set by the financial sustainability ratios. I suppose the only one that wasn't actually set there is that rate stability. So that is actually within the planning process, actually setting the expectation to the community how much our rate revenue is going to increase, and being consistent in that rate revenue increase. Due to the permutations of the factors that come into determining the rate, you're never going to actually be able to predict, to sit there and say with certainty what that means back to the individual, or what I would say the average residential ratepayer, because I don't know how much property values are going to move. I don't know, we can guess how much investment, new assessments are actually going to come through based on history. I don't know what the mix is going to change in relation to commercial versus residential. So there's a whole heap of factors that need to take into account translating that rate revenue that we're collecting back to a rate increase. So we can't do that through a long-term financial plan. That's an annual thing. However, we just need to make sure that when we're actually doing our rating discussions, we make sure that we're not actually giving away our growth revenue as well, So we do have this component of that new assessments. That new assessment income should be funding the services that actually are increased, because we've actually got more roads, we've got more street lighting, we've got more reserves, we've got everything, that we've got more bins that we need to collect as well. We can't sort of say, oh, we've got more money, so we'll give it back to, I suppose, our existing ratepayers. So that's... So feedback that I got on the night was that the rate revenue range prior to growth should be between 4 to 6%, and that's pretty much only over, that's at this point in time. And obviously as we go through the cycle, and as we actually come back and I suppose improve our financial position, we can actually assess that. But my advice is to sit there and say that if we're actually only going to be saying, oh, our rate revenue increase is CPI, we're always going to be chasing our tails. Because every year what we actually do is that we add new assets, we introduce new services, and we have to, we have to actually make sure that we're actually ensuring that we're actually collecting the revenue associated with the cost of those things, that new services and those new assets as well. Because, it is that consideration of the life cycle cost. So it's always going to be higher than CPI, the rate revenue increase as a base level. This is, I won't go through in detail, so this is just essentially the general principles that in thinking about what sort of strategies that we should actually employ and I suppose communicate to our community as to what we're actually doing and what we're actually going to focus on, is that breaking into the short term, medium and long term. And when we're actually talking about, so the emphasis on the short term, which is probably the 1 to 5 years, is realistically that renewal, getting our renewal spend back to the level that it actually should be, so it actually addresses the backlog and actually reduces the maintenance costs that is contributing to our deficits, because we're actually maintaining and continually spending money on assets that we shouldn't actually be spending on just fixing them because they're breaking down. So over the weekend, sitting on the couch watching Emily in Paris, was sort of sitting there thinking about how could I sort of break this down, is to sit there and say what our financial strategy should be. So obviously the first component of that is that our key thing is that we should be, financial sustainability should be one of our key strategies. And by being financially sustainable, it's making sure that we can provide the facilities and the services and the infrastructure needs of the community. So that should be that's our ultimate financial goal, and that should be our key strategy. And to do that, we need to actually have sustainable operating surpluses by the end of this term. While I know that the Audit Committee has said that they want us to be back into a operating surplus by next year, that's not going to happen. Let's be real. Let's get the, but just because I don't think it's going to happen, because I just think that it's just too much of a leap to come from where we are to that, to turn something around, when we know, there's the whole heap of issues about the fact that we've got to up this renewal spend. We've got to spend a lot of money before we can actually be in that position to, it is that old, you've got to spend money to make money scenario. That's, not that we're in the organisation to make money, but we actually need to make sure that we've got to spend some so we can actually save some money going forward. So, sorry, Natalie, I'll fail on that and I'll accept that and all that sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean that we won't have a red hot crack at doing what we need to do. But I would be very surprised if we had a break even or a operating surplus for next year's budget. And the other thing is that what we really need to focus on from that financial sustainability is actually building that liquidity in the business. We have to actually reduce our dependency on that overdraft facility. We have to actually build our, that recurrent budget. We need to actually be generating cash from that, but, from that liquidity. We shouldn't be using the overdraft. So I think that's our overarching strategy. And then underneath that, obviously, we need to actually be able to identify and deliver real savings. So we can sit there and say, oh, okay, well, we're going to save $100,000 there. But it can't be, oh, we're going to put a recruitment freeze and we're not going to actually, replace positions because we need to save some money. Because that is not a sustainable savings. We provide a level of service, and we've actually got an established staffing complement that we need to make sure that we can actually deliver that. If we don't replace staff when people leave, and people do leave, we have around about a 10% turnover, which is a normal 10% turnover. That's every single business. If we don't replace those, essentially there's a cost associated with that because we're not delivering the service. We don't have the capacity to actually potentially do some renewal program because we don't have the staff to actually do. We utilise our civil team to do our footpath renewal. If we don't replace those staff, we can't actually replace we can't do the football path program. So that's actually having a cost because we're actually having to maintain a substandard asset. So they do need to be embedded, so they actually need to be real. Obviously that comes out, we need to review our service delivery. We need to continually improve. We need to have that budget discipline, the budget discipline of to sit there and say, this is what we've actually said. And there were the 4 principles about, okay, if we aren't going to, if we're going to spend more money here, what are we giving up? What aren't we doing? What can't we do that's not actually going to cost us in the long run in the future? What project aren't we going to do? But we have to actually understand the consequences of that to make sure that it's actually we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul because further down the track. And that is that maintain that tight control over expenditure. You know, it is that budget discipline of sitting there saying, don't put motions forward to sit there and say, oh, I want you to do, we didn't budget for it, we didn't think about it, but I want you to do this year, you know, and even from a staffing perspective is to sit there and say, if something's happened, like, and I have had people come to me and said, oh, can I do this? No, it's not in the budget, you know, and I'm, you know, staff think that that's harsh, but I'm sitting there going, okay, well, you tell me what you're not going to do or how you're going to save that money to actually be able to do that. Otherwise, it's going to have to wait for next year and we'll have to consider it next year. That's the discipline that we actually need to have to make sure that we actually don't just spend because we think, oh, that's okay. It's only $5,000. Yeah, it's only $5,000. But when every single person, you know, when everyone asks for $5,000, it soon adds up to a lot of money. So from that perspective. Obviously, effective utilisation of our funding sources. So when there's funds available, we should be utilising them. But we should be utilising them for stuff that we've already planned for. We shouldn't be utilising funding for stuff just because it's there. Oh, we've got money, you know, it's not going to come around every year, but we've got nothing. We will create a project to actually fit the funding scheme, you know, when most of the funding schemes are 50-50. You know, we have to make a contribution. So unless that funding is actually offsetting something that we're already planning to do or that we're already doing, we should have the discipline to say no, you know. If we had reserves, using reserves, and utilising the borrowings for asset investment, you know. So we really need to make sure and have that focus of that energy that when we're actually borrowing, it's actually it's good borrowing. It's for that investment. It's for that. It's for the future benefit of the town, not the current benefit, or not the short-term benefit. Again, Wendy's talked a lot about from an asset management perspective, and that's where this sort of stuff comes in to the long-term financial plan, is how do we actually narrow that infrastructure gap? You know, we need to increase the renewal budgets. The long-term financial plan has an increase in the renewal budget compared to what we've actually had in the past. It is presenting a position where we're actually spending more money on renewal rather than new. And all that sort of stuff. And it is that question about what Wendy's proposed tonight. What is a satisfactory level? You know, it is that scenario of saying you can't have the Rolls-Royce service level for, you know, Holden price. I don't know I'm not a very car-orientated person, but, you know, get the, you know, we can't have a gold-plated service level and have the community expect a gold-plated service level when they're actually only prepared to pay for a home brand. You know, that's the home brand price for the gold-plated. It just, you know, it's that expectation of saying, okay, well, if this is somewhere in between, I suspect, is where we need to land. And again, basically, wherever possible, trying to apply for state and federal government. And that even also applies for any renewal expenditure as well. So if there's, you know, there's normally a lot of funding, you know, how can we actually do from a stormwater perspective? How can we actually utilise some of that stormwater funding to actually fund that? You know, so when we think about, oh, we can get some money here, some people sort of sit there and say, oh, okay, well, I've got extra money so I can expand the scope. No, the scope's the same, the council contribution is less, is the mindset that we actually need to have. It's not that, oh, now I can do this. No, you can't do that. You're still doing the same scope. And then obviously aiming for our benchmark results against our KPIs, so delivering on the KPIs that we actually said. So the structure around the long-term financial plan is around these 6 financial strategies, which I think has pretty much been consistent with probably the messaging, I suppose, that we've said tonight from an asset management perspective, and the messaging that's been coming through from the last budget process and some other discussions that we've gone through. Does anyone have any questions on those before I go on? Does anyone sit there and say that they're off the mark? They're violently, objected, have violent objections to them? Because it's critical, because obviously this is our plan, collectively, and yes, I'm right, I'm presenting this to you, but you actually need to sit there and say, okay, well, you need to own it just as much as I own it as well.
Yeah, look, for me, obviously this makes sense. I get it. But to own the plan, we need to start seeing those outcomes come through. I mean, not just potential money moved on June to then July to make a financial ratio and the like. Not accusing anyone of doing that, but that can be easily done to be able to meet ratios as well. As you know, Sharon, as you've told us multiple times, I can make the figures look however you want them to look. Absolutely. So the outcomes of this is that long game, that long vision. So yeah, to see them actually coming to fruition. I like the idea of the strategy, but the outcomes we're gonna have to start seeing to show that the strategy is working. And how do we set up that corporate planning as well? I like the idea of saying, hey, we actually need to break these down into 4 yearly outcomes too, because we need to be able to show those milestones being met every budget cycle, instead of the back and forth. Because saying no to $5,000, I agree. If you say yes, the floodgates open and whatever else, but in lack of anything else, we're always going to have that reaction, because those things need to be implemented regardless. People aren't just coming to us and going, oh, we need $5,000 for no reason either. So we need to be able to plot that and absolutely get the strategy, and we need to see those outcomes. But we're in a tight space because you can't show those actually working in a 6 to 12 month period. So yeah, I guess how we set those small term goals to be able to show, hey, this is working, is, I guess, when that ownership comes in organically.
Oh, I agree completely. And I think it is that, and it is that scenario of to sit there and say, yes, we need to get the runs on the board. And when I say we, it's collective, it's the whole organisation. So I think that, and that understanding of that messaging as well, I'll sit there and say, we're all in this together, so, and again, from us, from our perspective, is to sit there and say, we need to actually be, as well, quite strong in sitting there saying, okay, council member, you can want it, but what are we going to give up? We really need to, I think, from our perspective and the collective as well, we also have to, everyone has to have that thinking about, oh, okay, well, I really think that this is a priority. And these plans, and this is always the difficulty within the plan, because you develop a plan, and even when you develop a budget based on the information that you have at that point in time, and we know that things change. That we know that something comes out of left field and all that sort of stuff. And that's fine. But as long as we're actually also having that mindset as to sit there and say, oh, actually, yeah, what did we have in our plan that wasn't actually, that we can move, that we can defer to next year, and justify that, rather than just keeping on adding. There is still going to be some things that come out of the thing until we really have, I suppose, until Wendy and I have confidence in the asset management side of things, I suspect we're still going to have some surprises coming out of, from an asset management perspective, from a depreciation and a cost and all that sort of stuff. I'll sit there and say, I don't necessarily, 18 months into the organisation, I'm only just starting to understand some of the things that I really need to understand to sit there and say, yes, I have confidence in actually that we can deliver this. But I suppose it's a starting point, and we have to start somewhere. We have to draw that line in the sand, and I think that this is where this is to sit there and say this is the line in the sand, and once we actually adopt the plan and have these, I suppose, these principles, we need to be committed to them. That's the only way we're actually going to be able to demonstrate that we get the runs on the board, is actually having that commitment to it going forward.
Microphone. Yeah. So, yeah, these all look good. I guess what I was thinking of is just in terms of communication with the public. I think this is the kind of thing that, like, because we need to sell to the community if the rates are going to go up, and that we can say our renewal budget on this, you know, the basics is going, you know, we're doubling our renewal budget or whatever, and then that's a communication strategy that comes in of not just celebrating when there's a new park or something, but just every time there's a new curb and gutter or whatever, you sort of, you know, you go in with the depot and you get the CEO with a thumbs up and you say, we're doubling our renewal budget, take a look at this curb and gutter. You know, just in terms of the strategy to the public, because the danger is, you know, we have this council right now who are across it, but the danger of a public that is not happy with this and doesn't understand what's going on is that there'll be a big backlash, and a bunch of people will come in on a policy platform of reduce the rates, etc., and then you'll have to start a bunch of things all over again. And so the communication to the public is a vital part of that as well.
So I really agree with that, and I mean I don't know how I get people as excited as I am about things like road renewals and footpaths, but we need to find what that is and tap into it, because the other difficulty on that is that the question, like, let's say we renew one street, the person who still had the increase in their rate says, well, why isn't my street being done? You know, so it's a bit of a double whammy in that. It's not, you know, it really isn't the most, you know, attractive of things to invest in, but it's so important. But it's also only the people where they're getting the renewal that particular year reaping the immediate benefit. I think, again, that's why it's so important that we do have things like these streetscape projects, and the way that we've started to look at how we prioritise what streetscapes we would invest in is about those, you know, the higher volume traffic roads, the roads that connect people into schools or to other transport nodes, and getting that so that more people are seeing that investment in areas that are more commonly used, so that people actually get to see an outcome rather than it's, you know, I know some road in Gawler South that only, you know, the 20 houses that live on it have been renewed.
I actually thought we actually had all that. I thought we actually had a list with all the footpaths, and we had a list of all the road renewals already. Yeah, so I just thought we'd just, but because I've seen that where we've had this footpath will be replaced in 20 years or 30 years, and this road will be done here, and we had a problem because we had issues around bringing some footpaths forwards from other places and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we've got that, haven't we? Can't we just show that to people and say, well, this is when your footpath is planned to be done, this is when your road's planned to be done. Thank you very much.
We can certainly use that as part of the communications material, and yes, there is a prioritised list of where new footpaths need to go, and the roads, there is a priority list. They do change as we do that condition assessment, but it's about capitalising, I guess, on where there's a higher need. Like, you know, Clark Road is the classic right now. Like, we all know that road is well beyond needing to be repaired, but, you know, obviously we've been waiting because we want it to be done with the funding as part of the developer deeds that we've got. But now that we're ready to, now they're at the timing to do it, we're like, okay, well, how do we get Clark Street as a key linkage road between Evanston Gardens and Tamerlan Station, for example? How do we upgrade that as a streetscape so that it's got a new road, it's got improved curb and gutter, it's got improved like shared path, trees. That's how we're doing it. So we're not trying to bypass or bring things up in priority when they shouldn't. It's about going, here's the need, and now let's bunch it together. But you're right, for that response back to people saying, well, hang on, why aren't I getting a footpath, or why isn't my... Here's the reason, here's how we do it. Yeah, and it's important. And the consistency and sticking to that is really important. Otherwise, we do end up finding it... It's just hard to justify being consistent for 99% if you've gone off for the one. Yeah.
Can I say, because you asked, I think, just building off of what the Deputy Mayor said there, of course, personally, I think the comms piece is important, but also, you know, what Wendy was saying before, some things are a lot easier to sell or explain to the community than others. I mean, people understand what they experience, and when you have something like what Wendy was talking about with Clark Road, that's a lot easier to talk to the community about because they experience it, as opposed to saying, oh, well, yeah, we upgraded your footpath. And they go, I know that. And then you go, but we spent $450,000 on footpaths. And they go, why, you're invalidating my experience that my street is crap. And so it's not just about the comms piece, but there's some things are easier to sell than others. And when you have that comprehensive experience, I think, and that's why I'm so excited about this, because I think you guys have got it going in the right direction. But also, one other comment I would make is about our budgeting, and of course we need to be disciplined, but in terms of I think we need to be careful, and it's come up before, we can't go just full austerity on the town, because as the Deputy Mayor said, there will be backlash against that. And some of those things which are traditionally viewed as not being as important, like the community-facing stuff, which is actually really core to people having a great experience of their council, and unnecessary things. If we cut those too hard and too fast, then we will lose the social licence, I think, to undertake some of the larger, really material changes to our services and budgeting that needs to happen. So I would just say with that, you know, even if there are some small projects that we could go, oh, actually, we don't really need that. Yeah, but it could buy us a lot of social licence to do the hard work we need to do. And that's my point of view.
I think that's the challenge that councils have, because they're a service business, but they're also an asset managed business, and it's balancing that. And I agree that essentially, you know, we can't expense the service of those soft services, which I would rather at the expense of the hard service, you know. And we're not saying that essentially everything gets cut because we just have to focus on this, but it is that thing about, you know, predominantly, you know, fundamentally under this is to sit there and say, the basic premise of the plan going forward is that we're going to continue to provide the services that we actually are providing. We just need to actually provide it in a better way, in a more financially sustainable and efficient way. However, there may be some situations where we may do cut services because they're not wanted anymore. We've just done them for the last 50 years, and we just assume that everyone still wants it and all that sort of stuff. So there may be that, but I agree that we don't cut the fun stuff because that's what creates that community well-being to people, to sit there and say that they accept, I suppose some hardship because of all this other stuff as well.
And when I talk, quickly if I could add, when I talk about that as well, it's not just, you know, things that are perceived as fun stuff, which are services we've historically had. I mean, if you thought that, you know, 800 people really wanted a park bench and that was going to give them, and it had some sort of, park bench is a really bad example, but something that has some sort of cultural, historical, social significance to a large number of people in the town, which is sort of just another thing that we don't necessarily need, but has that value, not just a service like libraries or community programs and stuff. Sometimes it's those small things which maybe, you know, we just need to put aside a little bit of money to say, actually, we can fund this, and then there's 800 people who go, oh yeah, we feel listened to, and we understand that the council cares about us.
Yeah, I mean, are you able just to go back a slide? Sorry, just on the... Oh, wasn't there 6? That's the first 3.
Yeah, there's 2 outcome ones and then 3 and 4.
Yeah. So I guess we're talking about our continuous. So just about like you touched on, if we lose a staff member in natural turnover and then we don't replace it, the domino effect of that and the understanding of it all. I guess when we do see our financial reports and budgeting, the actuals versus like, so if we've got a goal that we're tracking to achieve, and superficially, I say in lack of a better term, we look like we're doing better in that snapshot of when the data's entered because of factors like we might have 2 FTE at this point in time that haven't been replaced. We might have a project that was budgeted to be delivered by a certain point of the time and that hasn't happened. So there's almost like this superficial surplus being shown, but then trying to communicate the fact that it is somewhat superficial and how we do that consistently to then make sure that we're on that common journey or that common goal is also tied into those, I guess, short-term milestones. And then just also touching on footpaths and hierarchy and priorities. I mean, you know, these lists and the asset renewals and everything, we're talking about a framework that tries to track our growth. How do our linkages happen through our traffic management and all the things that we're modelling now? If we go by the list that I think is 10 to 15 years old, that I'm still trying to figure out how some streets are prioritised over others and the like, we are left debating in the chamber about the very footpath I think my colleague's been brought up, because I might have a view on the linkage of what that looks like in modern day for the school children that actually use that area that might have grown in the last decade or more, but there isn't any modelling or there isn't any tracking or there isn't any actual conditional things. And then we also saw the opportunity of SA Water infrastructure happening at the same time, but we didn't have the flexibility at the time to benefit from the repair work that needed to happen. So I understand the linkages of them all, because these standalone lists are a little bit outdated, obviously, hence why you're redoing the works. Yeah, they need to be sympathetic. And I think that's where we then touch back to the small-term milestones, where we can actually be like, hey, we've got this data, we're still achieving this renewal stuff, and we've actually chosen to invest in here, and this is how it actually links into the bigger picture, the bigger footpath network, if you want to isolate it to the footpaths, the bigger road network, you know, yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the importance of some of that stuff about, you know, that asset data and that collection and being more regular and all that sort of stuff. You know, it is that thing of, you know, from a asset condition, you know, it is a 5-year or 4-year rolling program. You know, we need to, you know, this period of saying waiting 10 years to actually get some more data, we have to actually keep that going. And because, yes, this is a plan, you know, and again, you know, the asset plan, this plan is as good as it is the day we adopt it. And I can sit there and tell you the day after, something's going to change it, right? You know, something's going to happen, you know. Wendy can have the most fantastic asset management plans, and then potentially we might have a sinkhole and it's going to just like, you know, everything's just going to go Peter Tong, and all that sort of stuff. So realistic, like, you know, we have to be realistic, but we need to actually, I suppose, have that understanding enough of the underlying the underlying business, so we can actually respond and, again, communicate effectively to sit there and say, yes, we had this plan, but we didn't plan this, or this is how we're actually responding to it, and all that sort of stuff. And yes, I think from a reporting perspective as well, you know, this is this stuff that we're talking about, I think is probably a bit of a change of mindset, that we have to actually sit there and take, I suppose it's going to take some time, you know, and we're not going to get it right first up, and there's going to be reiterations and all that sort of stuff. But I think it is to sit there and say, as long as we agree that, yep, this is the journey that we want to be on, we can actually get there. You know, I know from, you know, Lauren, Erin and Renee and I and Victoria and all that sort of had this big discussion today about how we actually going to, you know, we've got savings targets that's in this budget. How are we actually going to effectively communicate that we're actually achieving that, and that they're sustainable and that they're deliverable, like, rather than, oh, we're just not spending this money for whatever reason. How are we going to report that back to you guys in the chamber? How are we actually also going to report it back to get the rest of the organisation on the same page that we're on as well, to sit there and say, okay, well, you know, you can't come to me and sit there and say, oh, actually, I didn't think about this, so can I have an extra $2,000? The answer is no, you know, unless you can actually sit there and, you know, so it is that mindset. So we don't have all the answers today, but I think it's just establishing that framework that we can actually move forward, and that we actually feel comfortable that we're actually doing what we need to do. And yes, we need to get those runs on the boards, but
I'd like to, there's one gap up there, and that is a communication strategy to our community.
that's going to be part of the actual consultation, so that's not actually part of it, the long-term financial plan. So this is actually in the long-term financial plan, so obviously we have to actually do that communication, that consultation, and then how we're actually reporting to that. So
we need to go out to our community to have a media statement or whatever, whatever it is. We need to communicate with our community.
Absolutely, and that's part, like, you know, I think that's actually, you know, once we actually get to the point of having a plan and agreeing to a plan, and it is that thing about how are we, and I'll sit there and say we as well, again, because, you know, from council members' perspective, you are, I suppose, got that touch to the community, how you know, it is that the collective, we can have social media, but what's the messaging from you guys when you're actually speaking, and the response to people talking when they sit there and talk to you as well. I suppose that's the collective communication and that media strategy or communication strategy that we actually need to do. But yeah, communication and how we, I suppose, sell it to, you know, sell it and get the, I suppose, get the community along with the journey as well to understand, you know, yes, there is going to be, and I think that this is actually quite important, that there is actually going to be a bit of pain. You know, it's not as though Wendy and I are going to have these plans and we're going to click our fingers and everything's all going to be hunky-dory, you know. I do remember, you know, back in the day when Bewitched was on, and I used to sit there in my room twiddling my nose hoping that my room would miraculously be tidy. You know, that's not going to happen. From that perspective, it is going to be, it's going to be painful, and we're not going to turn it around. Yep. So any other comments on that? And I'll just quickly move through some of the things just to give you a bit of the structure. So in relation to just so having an understanding of how we're actually building. So obviously it's a financial forecast. It's based on a whole, like going out for 10, 15 years, it's based on a whole series of assumptions, right? So there's some market-driven assumptions. So like obviously our population growth, how is that actually going to impact us? You know, because from a service level and also a revenue perspective. I'm not going to go through in details this, you've got a copy of that. Obviously, we've got inflation, so these are the economic factors that we can actually take into account. And what is the most relevant factor that we actually need to take in? So we've got CPR, we've got the local government price index, we've got the building construction index, and we've got the roads and bridges. So these are the economic indexations that we actually apply. And again, this is based on the information that we actually have today. This is all historic, like, you know, these forecasts are based on historical stuff and based on, I suppose, market intelligence that we have now about the fact that, you know, inflation's going to continue high for, you know, be sticky for probably another 12 to 18 months. So it's actually going to be probably quite a few years before inflation gets back into that target range of 2 to 3%. So we are going to have periods of high inflation, high costs. You know, it is that thing that, yes, the roads and bridges construction costs have come back, you know, so we're not probably, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know whether we're actually going to have another spike, but, you know, based on this information of using averages, whether it's a 5-year average or 10-year average, and all that sort of stuff. So these assumptions are going to change, and they're going to be reviewed every year based on the information that we actually have. So there is going to be variations in what the financial forecast is and what we're actually doing because of these economic conditions. Obviously, from a rate revenue perspective, you know, from a rate, the plan is based on the assumption that the rating, I suppose our rating strategy is going to be consistent with what, you know, so there's not any wide changes in the elements that how we actually rate. There is those things about the fact of, you know, we have a cost indexation, so we actually need to increase our rate revenue appropriate for the cost indexation. So some of that is going to be reflective of the price movements from a CPI or a local government price index, from pay, salary increases and all that sort of stuff, that combination. And then there's also going to be that factor that we have to actually already build in, like when we actually add new assets, there's an actual cost associated that's not actually being built in. So we have to make sure that we're actually raising enough revenue for the increase of level of service that we're actually providing. What that number is a really difficult question to actually ask, and how we actually quantify that and how we can actually I suppose separate that and identify that through the budget processes of breaking down what the movements are in our expense base to actually sort of say, okay, well, this is how much of our expenses have increased because of X, Y, Z. So that translates to this is the increase. So we actually need to have a revenue source increase as well. So we probably do need to get better at actually reporting that through the annual budget cycle as well. But again, the premise is being between trying over the plan to keep it between that 4% to 6% rate revenue increase. So that's a rate revenue increase. And then we've got on top of that, we actually get some revenue from around about 2%. And again, that's just based on history, forecasting that, you know, there's nothing indicating other than probably coming up to about 2046, something that we won't have any land left anyway in the current area. So our growth will be limited. So it's how we manage that. And then, so most of the assumptions are based on those economic market driven. From an expenditure perspective, you know, it includes the cost for recurrent capital and future expenditures. There's also this funding allocation for, I think from Isaac's perspective, you know, those new service initiatives, those new little things that we actually need to do to actually enhance the communities, enhance the community wellbeing. And then we've also got a whole heap of cyclical costs. Every 4 years we have an election. It costs us $160,000, $200,000 to run that election. We have to actually plan for that sort of stuff. So, but we can't sort of, you know, and then that's the balance of sitting there saying, in an election year, do we not offer anything to the community, which is not a good thing as well. We still have to offer something for that rather than, you know, them paying for the benefit of running an election, which, and all that sort of stuff as well. So it is that balancing, but we have to actually plan for that. and making sure that the indexation is applying. Employee expenses, so we have enterprise agreement that basically fund. Based on our enterprise agreement, each year we actually have steps, so we have scales. So there's some automatic increments as people move through that scales from reclassification and growing position. And again, there's growth. So at the moment, I've sort of said, okay, well, 1%, I don't know what that number is, some of that thing. So the forecast at the moment actually has that 1% in there as to sit there and say, what's an appropriate, because I want to get away from this concept of we're always adding 2 staff members every year, because we're not adding 2 staff members every year. We need to actually represent, to sit there and say, okay, well, and it may not be that it's a linear growth, you know, we might actually have stepped, but we need to actually plan for as we expand, as we take on more assets, as we grow as a community, more people, we are actually going to have, you know, if we grow a population, we are actually going to have more people working at our libraries, you know, we are going to, from that perspective as well, but making sure that we grow in that right area. Again, so that initiatives, so within the current budget, we've got this $400,000 at the moment, which is new services, new initiatives, new one-off projects and all that sort of stuff as well. So whether $400,000 is the right number, don't know, but that's again based on the trend of what you've actually been doing over the last few years. That's a number I've picked, and we can argue whether 400's enough or 400's not enough. And then there might be, you know, as we go through that budget cycle each year, we might actually be making some adjustments to that, but we just need to have that there. Borrowing costs, if anyone knows what's happening with interest rates, let me know, and all that sort of stuff. So I've just sort of picked some, and again, the borrowing costs are based on the current information that I know. You know, it's to sit there and say, you know, if you listen to people, some people say that there's a rate cut coming next month, other people say it's not coming till February, and then other people sitting there saying it's, you know, 2026, who knows? So, you know, so some of these things, so again, we might be overstating some of our expenditure and all that sort of stuff, but again, we just need to understand at the current position in the next couple of years, interest rates are actually going to be high, you know, but we just then, the way we actually accommodate that is that we actually need to, I suppose, pay down that debt, get rid of that variable debt and all that sort of stuff, so we can invest for the in the long term rather than actually having that short-term investment. So some of the strategic actions, obviously it's that ongoing renew of the service delivery programs, you know, and continually seeking those improvements in the time, the cost, the quality and all that sort of stuff as well. So everything aspects to increase those efficiencies. So, you know, a previous boss said, you always have to do more with less. I used to hate it, but I think that's the approach and that's the philosophy that we actually need to take. We need to actually do more with what we've got rather than when we have more to do, we're adding more costs. We need to actually work out how we can actually do it within our existing resources. We really do need to reduce the cost base of the organisation. And again, and I'm not saying that that's something that we need to strip out a whole heap of costs. It might actually be going forward. It's not actually increasing cost. It is that doing the accommodating for the new assets and the contributed assets, but doing it within our existing resources. You know, doing it, I suppose, working, you know, staff will hate me for saying this, but potentially we have to actually probably work staff hard for a period of time and get to a scale before we actually then sort of sit there and say, okay, well then we actually need to, you know, have new staff members to do that, you know. So there is that period of there's a bit of a lag in the cost increase as opposed to a lead of that cost increase before that actually happens. So that's how we're actually, when I talk about reducing the cost base, it's probably trying not to just increase it by the cost indexation every year. How do we actually accommodate that? You know, and it is this budget discipline about, you know, before we actually look at, you know, new services or expanded services, you know, work out, is there an external funding source? Is there anything that we can actually offset? Is there something that we don't, no longer, like by providing this service, we don't need to do that? We're actually accommodating, so we're not doubling up. Are we not doubling up with things that we're actually doing? And again, yeah, just making sure that we're in all these decisions, it's fair and equitable. You know, we are being fair and equitable to all ratepayers across the council base. We're being fair and equitable to our staff. We're being fair and equitable to everyone, like all our stakeholders, in making all those decisions that we're actually providing. So this just sort of reinforces some of the stuff that we've actually gone through from an asset management planning. So Wendy and I have worked really hard, our teams have worked really hard to actually make sure that we've actually got this consistency. We actually understand where we're going and what we can actually do. We've toed and froed a lot over the last a month about getting what we actually think is a fair and reasonable, and that's lining up with, I suppose, these strategies of what we're actually been talking about tonight. So again, I'm not going to go through this, but this is just more for your information from an asset renewal perspective. And also in relation to some of this stuff, this information and this planning that we've actually done, while we've actually also taken into account some of the reviews and where we're at, we've also taken into that feedback that we actually did from having the discussions that we've had with ESCOSA as to what their expectations of what they're actually going to be seeing and where our gaps are. So the expectation is that our renewal, we should be spending more on maintaining our existing assets rather than spending money on our new assets. There is, so this is presenting that we're spending less on our new, but this new stuff is what we would say is essential new as well. So it's not the strategic, it's not the big stuff and all that sort of stuff. So this is the footpaths and the curbs in areas that we don't actually have footpaths and curbs. Looking at from a stormwater drainage perspective, looking at what drainage and what we need to do to affect, I suppose, that service level and improve that service level in regard to flooding and all that. So it's not necessarily big. And the open space stuff is more about, those existing playgrounds and all that sort of stuff, and just bringing them up in line where we actually think from a service level, from a population that's linked to that population and usage perspective as we actually grow in size and population and all that. Based on the projects, so, and this is going to be the most contentious issue and all that sort of stuff. So with regard to, out of that big long list of projects, what are the things that we actually said, okay, well, we think from a priority perspective that takes into account the collective views of the council members, the executive, based on that, and then where we actually think the need is being. So again, we've sort of said, again, from a streetscape perspective, that streetscape, we're saying it's a strategic project because it's actually building on that uplift of that active transport areas and combining and doing big projects together. So again, this is scenario of what you guys said as a priority, and then that overlay as well from an asset management perspective as well. So because fundamentally we can think it's a priority, but there's also this risk management, especially like, we talk about Main North Road, Williston, there is a risk management aspect that we actually need to manage that with regard to the flooding. So we have to do some drainage works and all that sort of stuff, and we know that it's something that we've actually got as a plan to sit there and say, okay, well, it's one of our main entry streets into the town, so we actually want to make it I suppose it's that feature street and make it pleasant and people enjoy coming into Gawler from that end. So these are the projects that are currently costed within the plan. Obviously, there will be some open for discussion, but if you look at the... and then there's the other redevelopments and all the other, majority of these things are big ticket items. These are really big ticket items in the sense of these are the major redevelopments. And realistically, from a financial perspective, some of these projects, like, this Southern Sporting Precincts and the Elliot Goodger, the town centre and all that sort of stuff, and the aquatic centre redevelopment and all that sort of stuff, realistically, our ability to deliver these is dependent on us actually being able to get some funding to support. These projects aren't of a size that within the next 15, 20 years, we would be able to self-fund. Right, so, and that's some of the managing those community expectations that realistically that we actually need to do. Obviously the timing, and again, this is just basically based on the colour of the dots and the time frames and all that sort of stuff as well, and some of the linkages. Obviously, we're going to do the Town Street stage 1 before we do Town 3, but we might not. Stage 3, we might do stage 3 because stage 3 is up that end, I think. Up the Williston end, we might decide that we're going to do stage 3 before we do stage 2, vice versa, and all that sort of stuff. Or we might do stage 2 before we do stage 1, which, realistically, but, being an accountant, being logical, it goes 1, 2, 3. From that perspective. So these projects are outside the current 10-year planning timeframe, but they're not going to be lost. They're actually going to be included in the plan to communicate to the community that we are still doing these things. So they're still on our agenda and all that sort of stuff. And these are indicative timeframes. And I think that this is some of that stuff that we actually need to make sure that, and these are the things that we potentially might bring in to that planning framework if we've actually got the capacity and if there's funding available and all that sort of stuff. But we actually have to make sure that we've got that, I suppose, that fundamentally that first 5 years of getting ourselves back into a position where I would sit there and say that we're actually paying down debt. We're paying down, we're reducing our debt balance and all that sort of stuff as well. Just to finish off. Obviously all these things have been put into the model and all that sort of stuff, and it spits out some numbers. Again, the scenario here is to sit there and say, I think it will be probably at the end of this term. So the 26, 27 year is where we would start be making some inways. If we can actually make sure that we have that focus on in the first over, this year, which we've actually done in the budget, next year in the budget, and even in that 26, 27 budget, we actually focus on reducing that cost base and focusing on our renewals, making sure that we actually have that emphasis, because until we renew our infrastructure, we can't reduce that maintenance cost that we're now incurring as a result of that. So obviously, and again, as we go through, as we grow, as we actually reduce that cost base, we get more efficient and all that sort of stuff. So we have that greater capacity from a revenue and a surplus perspective. Again, realistically, I sit there and say that actually goes up to a $9 million operating surplus. Realistically, I don't think that that's actually what's going to happen in reality. It's just that as we go further out, I suppose what's actually coming from a new service and the growth and all that sort of stuff is vaguer and vaguer and vaguer. So, I've sort of said, okay, well, we're going to grow at the same rate. We might actually grow and then we might spark. So realistically, so don't be too perturbed. However, we need to sort of probably get that generation of that cash to actually be in the capacity to actually pay down our debt. And this is where one of the things that I actually wanted to demonstrate as well is to sit there and say, so over the plan, we've actually maintained, I suppose, that higher a focus on the renewal. So it's not a thing about we've spent a whole heap of time, even when we actually want to do those strategic projects, we can't do those strategic projects at the expense of the renewal spend. We have to, if anything's going to come back, it's that blue, that new stuff. We're going to have to draw back that new to actually do some of that big spend. We have to really maintain that renewal spend at that level. We can't compromise on that because effectively, as soon as if we have a period, if we go through a period of 5 years where we cut back on our renewals, all that's going to do is that it's going to start returning us back into the position because we're going to have more maintenance costs, which we're going to have through our operating expenditure and all that sort of stuff as well. Debt's going to spike. That's a bit of a lag as well, as to sit there and say, so it's a bit of a lag, and it's a bit of a combination of the fact that we're still probably having a bit of an operating deficit in our current budget and our operating budget. We've got the depreciation impact. Again, we don't know what the scenario is, and we are, literally, I think, over these last 2 years, we have actually probably doubled our renewal spend, and that's actually an impact, and we're doubling it in a period where we actually are essentially, dependent on debt and that overdraft facility to fund operations. So we are going to have a bit of a spike until we can actually get to that position that, we can start, we're generating that cash in the business to actually start paying down. So for, and we set it as part of the budget process, we're gonna break that $25 million debt limit this year, and there's a report coming to you next week requesting that debt limit actually needs to increase, so we need to actually do that. And so we still need to plan. Just because we're increasing the debt limit, it's our capacity to access debt doesn't mean our debt's going to grow straight away. But we still have to, again, while we have to plan for our assets and what we actually want to do to get to this at the end of the strategic, we also have to start planning now how we're actually going to fund it. And so we're going to have to increase that $25 million capacity or facility limit, probably up to around about that $40 million limit. Yes, Paul?
I think I've asked this question before. That we're going to go to the LGFA and take up our debt. Mm-hmm. They're going to put some limitations on us, aren't they? Because they've said that. They came and told us that. How does this reflect now with all of this? I mean, I'm concerned that we're going to push the debt level up. The LGFA is going to say, well, wait a minute, you can't do this, this and this, and it pushes everything out way over there somewhere. Because we've got no capacity to do anything.
So essentially I've had conversations with LGFA, obviously in preparation for the council report. Again, yes, it's going to be on the surface, so obviously it's going to be on this asset management plan. And I think that if we show the commitment to the things of focusing on renewal and making sure that we're doing our renewal and we're not expensing our renewal for the shiny stuff over this period of time where we're actually addressing, I suppose, where we are now, they're comfortable with it. So verbally that they've had that comfortable. And the commitments that they're actually going to have is to sit there and say, they're going to say, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to deliver, So the period of time is that we're going to have to actually, the covenant that they're actually going to put on is their expectation is that by the end of this council term, we'll be in a break-even position, and that we will actually be presenting surplus budgets going forward, and that we're actually going to be committing to, we're going to be delivering on our renewal spend, You know, we're not going to sit there and say that we're actually going to do renewal of X% and then decide when we come budget that, well, oh, actually we're going to reduce it, we're going to half our renewal spend, and then we're actually going to do a project that we hadn't actually planned, or that's outside the scope of what we actually said in the long-term financial plan. They're the sorts of covenants that, you know, so yes, they might push it out, but the reason they're pushing it out is because we haven't committed and we haven't stuck to what we actually said that we were going to do. So that's where I say it's the commitment that's actually from us all in the chamber and the organisation to actually sit there and say, again, if we want to do that, and we have to do it. You know, there's no if, buts, whatever. If you want to do all that big stuff, this is what we have to do. We won't be able to deliver the basics if we don't increase our debt limit, right? You know, it is a result of some circumstances and all that sort of stuff. This is the position that we're in now, you know, and we can sit there and close our eyes and sit there and say, oh no, we can't do that, we can't increase our debt limit, we can't do anything. Or we can sit there and say, yep, we're in a bad position, we need to actually work out how we're actually going to get out of it. And it is that same scenario of we're actually going to have to continue to spend to get out of it, because otherwise it's a circular thing.
It's just that at the end of this term, our net financial liabilities ratio will be 110%.
Absolutely.
So the caveat is that we have a balanced budget, we won't.
No, it's not a balanced budget. It's basically delivering on your plan. So if we have a plan to sit there and say by the end of this council term, or for the 26-27 year, for that budget year, that we're going to have either a break-even budget or a surplus or a small surplus, right? That's what we actually have to commit to. It's not necessarily saying that we have to turn it around and have an operating surplus. It's what have we said that we're going to do in the plan, and we're going to have to demonstrate that we're actually committing to that plan, right? So that's the scenario, you know. So if we commit to sit there and say that we're actually going to have 4% rate revenue increases plus 1% for our new projects and all that sort of stuff. When we actually set a budget, we can't go back and sit there and say, oh, actually, you know, we said that we're going to do 5%, but I don't think that I can do that, so we're only going to do a 2%. You know, if we do that, yes, they're going to sit there and say, actually, you know, it's those sorts of things that the covenant's around, as to sit there and say, we just need to make sure that we can demonstrate that we're committing to it. We're not going to get the right number. We're not going to get, you know, based on all things being equals and, you know, the assumption and the starting point of that, because realistically that figure depends on where the starting point of our debt position is at the end of 25, 26. I don't know what that position is going to be. I can only guess based on the assumption of this is where our starting point is at 24, 25. This is what we're actually going to spend. This is all the revenue that's actually going to come in. All those maths. But in 25, 26, there's an election, so we might actually get another, you know, $5 million that we can actually spend to existing projects that we'd planned for, so we don't have to borrow $5 million. I don't know that. But, you know, this is just a forecast based on all those assumptions. Right? And so, yes, and can't guarantee that all those assumptions are actually going to fall true. But again, we just need to commit to sit there and say, actually, our focus for the next couple of years is focusing on renewal, focusing on delivering some savings, focusing on doing that, and committing to a degree of revenue of that. That's the approach that they're not going to rip this. They won't take, the only way that they will sit there and say, no, we won't do it, is if we sit there and say, actually, we've predicted that we're going to have a revenue increase, a revenue base of $50 million, and then we, you know, and I'll say rates because rates is our major source of income, is that essentially we decide that we're just going to reduce our rate revenue base by $5 million, and we only have $45 million because of a decision that we have made.
I get it, but I mean, the debt's going, we're going to go from 25 million to almost 45 million.
Yep.
Okay, just that's reality.
Well, based on these numbers, it may not be the reality. I don't know what the reality is because I can't predict.
We've just added 20 million bucks.
Yep.
Debt.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yep, right. As long as everyone's cognizant of that.
We haven't, but again, we're going,
Basically doubling our debt like that.
it's gonna peak. It is gonna peak.
So, just to really dumb this down, what we're talking about is, hey, we're right now in the business and we're not in the best way. How do we trade our way out of it? Okay, so we now need to trade our way out of it because this business doesn't stop. We are in a position we need to trade our way out of it. Otherwise, close the doors and then that's it, which isn't the option. And to trade our way out of it, here's our financial strategy to do it. Okay, we don't have the means in our own bank account to deliver on our financial ability to trade out of it. So we go to the LGFA and we go, here's how we're going to trade out of it. They go, okay, we're going to give you this money, but you need to show us along the way you are implementing your trade out of strategy. If you don't do that, then we're going to have some problems. Oh, it's stunning community expectations. It's stunning what modern day service delivery is. It's stunning everything. But look, if we don't figure out how to trade our way out of it, then it wasn't even on the radar before. That was the point. Yeah, there was no time frame. At this point in time, you're saying we'll push it right back, but it didn't start from anywhere. It was never anywhere to look at, to push back from. If we're talking about now, and we're going, oh, that's going to be pushed right back. Well, no, it's now on the radar at 10, 15 years' time. We never had that conversation, and now we are having that conversation. How good's that?
But I think it's always been, realistically, Paul, it's always been 10 to 15 years away. You know, some of these things have always been 10 to 15 years away.
What I heard from the people that came lobbyists, they weren't their expectations.
It's a difference between to sit there and say their expectations and what the reality is, right? You know, and again, as to sit there and say, and that is some of that stuff is about. Is setting the expectations and managing that expectations, right? And maybe that's something that we haven't done well in the past. We haven't managed those expectations, and that's the same thing as to sit there and say, okay, well, this is the line in the sand, as to sit there and say, okay, well, again, and it is that same scenario of how are we going to trade out of it, you know, how, and again, I'll go back to think, we do have to spend money to make money. We have to actually spend this money because if we don't increase the debt, we're not actually going to have the capacity to actually renew our assets, right? Because of the situation that we're in.
Increase our debt if we don't renew those assets.
Correct. And it will increase our debt the wrong way because we'll be investing in keeping the door, like turning the lights on with that debt rather than actually, you know, and band-aiding that same scenario, you know. It is that thing of, you know, it's not pleasant, you know, but I think this is the reality of what we're actually facing in the sense of, yes, we are going to have an increased debt. And realistically, you know, those numbers haven't changed in the last 2 years of what I've been presenting. They probably got a bit worse because the last 2 years I've just sort of said renewal. Now I've actually overlaid some of those, I suppose, those strategic projects that we've been talking about onto it, but effectively I'm still saying, and what we're saying as a collective, not just me, collectively, is to sit there and say, yes, we can do this, but we've actually got some hard yards and it's going to be 10 or 15 years away before we're actually going to be positioning ourselves. in that, unless potentially we can, potentially if we actually get some elements of some funding where we may be able to do a component of, the Elliott Goodger master plan, because it's within us a defined scope and it's fully funded. We can do those sorts of things, but we're not going to do the big grand scam. We're not going to be doing the big Taj Mahal of sporting facilities all in one bang. If we want to do that, it's 15, 20 years away. Well, and that's what this plan is doing, and again, and it's as long as we tell people, it's not me, it's as long as we tell people as a council, as a collective, and that we're saying the same thing, as to sit there and say, okay, well, this is the plan, this is the expectations and all that sort of stuff. And again, it's that same scenario. If you want to bring it forward, what don't you want? Do you want 12th Avenue fixed up? Do you want Main North Road fixed up? Do you want to drive along potholed streets, or do you want a nice shiny stadium? I suppose that's, it is harsh, but that's the harsh realities of what we're having, because everything's a trade-off. Realistically, it's a trade-off, and we're in it for the long haul. Ultimately, I think that's what we're aiming to get to, be in a position where we can actually provide the new sporting facilities and the new swimming pool and whatever else comes out of the community as that grows in the next 10, 20 years.
I think there's some. I think the communication strategy is really important. And can I say, while the numbers look, they look scary, but we can explain the strategy. And I'd argue that for the first time, we can actually say, this is how we get ourselves in the scenario so that we can do these big things, so that they have got an outlook and a time frame on them. Yes, they're past 10 years, but you know what? Council doesn't end in 10 years. There's investment strategies for 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years. We're actually starting to look at some of those out-year outlooks and being able to communicate how we're actually going to get there. At the same time, we come back to what we were talking about an hour ago, which is, it's not that we drop the ball on all these other on the big stuff. We still plan appropriately, and we put strategies in place so that if the opportunity comes through, so that we can move them forward appropriately, we do. And we do the right bits of the project at the right time. So we don't end up doing what should be phase 3 of a project, because it really should be phase 3 of a project, as phase 1. It's about having that smart. That's the big project thinking mentality, right? So we keep that there is a planning horizon for that, and we can actually communicate that now, so people do have their expectations managed. You're right, that communication is critical. I've written it down, and we'll work out some good key messages.
And realistically, we're seeing it already. I mean, if you come and sit in the working group where you're talking about the sporting community coming in and lobbying us, the conversation, the way that it's evolved from day dot on, we need new facilities now, to now, how are we going to make it through the next 5 to 10 seasons with what we've got? Wendy sat in on her first working group meeting the other month, and in lack of a better term, the band-aids of what we need to do to survive are the conversations now. In the meantime, how do we feed in to the master planning? How do we understand where budget sits, and how do we? That is all new to this council, and I think it's like anything. You can't fix what you don't know, and we're getting closer to actually understanding what you know. Just if you don't like it, well, unfortunately, it is what it is.
I'm concerned because we had representations here from the sporting group saying we're going to shut the clubs down because they don't comply with the AFL standards. That's what they told us, and now we're saying, it's 15 years down the track. So let's just be clear about what's happening here.
You're in two different conversations there. About SANFL shutting down is about a compliancy thing about some change rooms. It's not about, oh, we need a $42 million development to comply, otherwise we need to shut our doors. There's two differences in that. And that's what's being worked through in a factual manner, because these users, these volunteers, these families have been at it for 10 plus years without these sorts of conversations, and this is all they've got. Now we're providing some more education, the cross-pollination of that education, and they're going, all right, what are our short-term needs? What are our long-term needs? And not needs, needs not to be convinced with wants. You know, like, it's a different conversation now than what you're talking about. And yeah, I invite you to have those conversations, because I think you'll be quite heartened with the language that's being used now. And a lot of back-end work has gone into that too, collectively, for those who are on that working group.
I'm hoping we're getting close to the end. And thank you very much. Listen, tonight's been really valuable. One of the key things I've had is, and I think we've mentioned it very many times, we speak as a collective voice. So as part of our communication plan, I hear you saying that there'll be a key messaging that will come out for all elected members to use as well as staff. I just add the extra bit in, having come from a public meeting earlier tonight, that extends perhaps in a slightly different format so that the customer service, people who answer the phones, are aware that this is happening as well. Because in this public meeting, it wasn't us, but obviously the customer service staff answering the phones had no idea that the event was happening, and that's caused angst. So I think we are maturing in our community engagement if we move into these roles, and I look forward to that, because I think, again, all 11 of us, from the Mayor and the elected members, all need to have clarity on what it is we're doing, so as that we can explain, we can reassure, we can discuss with the community what it is we're planning. If we don't rely on Facebook, we don't rely on the Bunyip, we actually need to be the communicators. Seems obvious, but I think it's like Councillor Shanks says, we're coming into a new part of the way that this council works if we do that.
Does anyone else have any questions? I don't have anything more to add, other than, I suppose, as I said, the plan is to have the asset management plan and the long-term financial plan presented at the September council meeting for consultation. From that perspective, and again, it is to sit there and say, okay, well, it's a plan, and realistically, it's based on numbers that we have today, and we know that things change. And I think that's actually the discipline that we actually now need to do, is to sit there and say, we are going to have to review, and that even goes to, so we have a 10-year asset management plan, but realistically we're going to have to actually renew that all the time, continually on an annual basis. Like this document now has to actually get renewed every year, after the budget. So again, we need to actually understand going forward the decisions that we actually make in the budget, what it has on our long-term financial plan, but also what it actually has on our asset management plans as well, and how that interlinks back and back to it as well. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'm not going to sit there and say that it's actually going to be an easy task. There is actually going to be a lot of commitment that we're actually going to have to take from, obviously that happens in the chamber, but also happens within the organisation. And I think that's our collective, as the executive, the responsibility to actually communicate the same messaging back down to the staff as well, to sit there and say, this is the journey that we're on, this is the path, and this is the approach that we're actually going to take, and the discipline that we have in the chamber here collectively is the same discipline that we actually expect of staff as well. So before they come and say, oh, I need some more money, it's like, what have you done to look at it? What are you giving up? And all those sorts of conversations as well that need to actually happen as well. And it is that change of culture and that change of approach that we just need to actually encourage and get through to the organisation as we go through. But it's not going to be an overnight. It's not something that, you know, we're going to come to next year's budget and everyone's going to be happy because it's going to be an easy process. It's not going to be any easier. And realistically, and let's be real, I think some of this process here is actually going to be realistically forming, you know, the budget for next year, you know. So we're probably doing next year's budget process now in setting those parameters and those expectations of the community and of the staff and of what we're actually going to deliver and what we actually present back to you as we actually go through that budget process as well. So, and I think that that's probably what we're actually going to be doing every year now, you know, that whole concept of where the budget is and all that sort of stuff, and that rethink of hopefully some of the discussions are just around the edge rather than the bulk, because we actually already know what the expectation is and the setting of that going forward from that perspective. So thank you very much.